The train had been moving for 3 hours, and for a long time, there had been nothing outside the window but darkness. Claire lay on the lower bunk, staring at the ceiling of the sleeping car, and silently counting the clicks of the rails. The same rhythmic clatter that had been a lullaby in her childhood, but now, for some reason, wouldn't let her sleep. Nearby, on the adjacent lower bunk, Mark breathed softly. He had fallen asleep quickly, almost as soon as the train pulled out of Penn Station, simply closing his eyes, turning to the wall, and that was it. For another 10 minutes, Claire watched his broad back under the thin blanket and thought about how easily everything came to him. Sleep, calmness, self-confidence, it was all as if it were built into him from birth. They were both 26. They had gotten married in May, 7 months ago. The wedding had been modest. Claire's father, George Laren, had given just enough for the celebration that no one could say he had completely cut his daughter off. But no one saw any joy on his face that day either. He shook Mark's hand dryly, almost formally, gave a short toast, and left before anyone else. Claire had pretended not to notice then. She was good at pretending. Life with her father had taught her that well. George Laren was one of those people they call a self-made man. A real estate development business, several properties in the New York suburbs, connections in the right offices. He never shouted, never stomped his feet. He just had a way of looking at you that made you feel guilty. Mark didn't bend under that gaze. That, perhaps, was what angered her father the most. Mark worked as a process engineer at a manufacturing plant in Elizabeth, New Jersey. He wasn't poor, but he wasn't wealthy either. They rented a one-bedroom apartment together in the suburbs, inexpensive but clean. Claire worked as an editor at a small publishing house. Life was steady, without fights, without passion, calm, perhaps too calm. Now they were on their way to Boston. Mark had said he wanted to show her the city where he grew up. He had planned the route, bought the tickets, organized everything. Claire had agreed easily. She had long noticed that in their union, she was the one who most often agreed. But until tonight, it hadn't seemed like a problem. She looked at the ceiling again. The car swayed rhythmically. Someone walked down the corridor outside their compartment. Quiet footsteps, almost inaudible. Claire closed her eyes and had almost dozed off when the compartment door suddenly creaked softly. It opened just enough for a person to slip through. Claire propped herself up on her elbow. In the doorway stood the train attendant, a woman in her 50s, not tall, stout, in a formal Amtrak jacket. Claire had seen her earlier when they boarded. She had checked their tickets silently, professionally, without extra words. Her name? Claire had managed to see the name tag. Brenda. Now Brenda stood in the doorway, looking at Claire with an expression that could hardly be called professional. Something in her gaze was personal, almost human. She took a step closer and leaned in. Her voice was barely audible, quieter than the noise of the wheels, quieter than Mark's sleeping breath. "You need to get off at the next station," she said. "Just don't wake your husband, or you'll regret it." Claire didn't immediately understand that she was hearing these words for real. She thought she had misheard, that it was a dream, that fatigue was playing tricks on her. But Brenda didn't leave. She stood there, looking calmly, firmly, the way people look when they've already made a decision and are now waiting for someone else to accept it. "What?" Claire mouthed. "The next stop is in 20 minutes. Take your bag. Get off. Quietly." "But why? I don't understand." "Not now," Brenda interrupted, glancing quickly at the sleeping Mark. "You'll understand later. Just do what I say." And she left. The door closed quietly. For a few seconds, Claire sat motionless, listening to her own breathing. It was uneven. Her heart was beating faster than it should. She didn't believe in signs, didn't believe in premonitions, didn't believe in people who come in the night with advice without explanations. She was an editor, a person of words and logic, and she liked it when everything had a reason. But there was something about this woman, the way she stood, the way she looked, the way she spoke, almost without a voice that couldn't be dismissed. Not mysticism, not a prediction, something living, real, like the smell of smoke you sense before you see the fire. Claire looked at Mark. He lay with his back to her, breathing evenly. His shoulders were relaxed. He was truly fast asleep. What am I doing? She thought, getting up from the bunk. Her movements were cautious, almost mechanical. She didn't turn on the light, using the weak nightlight above the door. She felt under the bunk for her travel bag, a small one with her documents, phone, wallet, and a couple of items. She threw on her jacket, slipped her feet into her sneakers. She did all of this as if she weren't the one making the decision, but someone else was making it for her. The train began to slow down. It was noticeable. A slightly different rhythm of the wheels, a gentle forward tilt. Claire took her bag and stepped toward the compartment door. The corridor was empty. Dim lights illuminated the long passage between compartments. At the end of the car, the vestibule was lit. Claire walked that way without looking back, clutching her bag to her side, telling herself, it's just nerves, just fatigue. She would get to the vestibule, calm down, and go back. She had almost reached the car door when something made her stop. Not a sound, not a voice, just a feeling, that same animal instinct that had risen in her back in the compartment when Brenda looked into her eyes. Claire turned around. Mark was standing in the corridor. He was about 15 feet away from her, in just his pants, barefoot, silent. He just stood and looked at her, without surprise, without a question, without a "Claire, where are you?" Nothing, only his gaze. Steady, empty, like a turned-off television screen, the train stopped. Through the window flashed the platform of a small nighttime station. A few lamps, a wooden station building, darkness all around. Claire didn't remember opening the train car door, didn't remember the steps. She only remembered her feet hitting the platform hard, cold, real. And she ran, not looking back anymore, not thinking. Just forward, into the darkness, into an unfamiliar town, away from that gaze she couldn't explain but which knew something about her that she didn't yet know herself. Behind her, the train horn blew, and it departed. And she was left alone on the platform, with her bag in her hands, her hot breath in the cold air, in a town whose name she hadn't quite caught, with no understanding of what had happened. Only with one firm knowledge, growing in her chest like a hot coal, something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time, and she had felt it, she just hadn't allowed herself to know. Dawn was still a long way off. The platform was almost deserted. A few dim lamps illuminated the small wooden station building, shabby with peeling yellow paint and a train schedule under glass that, by the looks of it, hadn't been changed in 10 years. A bench by the entrance, a trash can, a single payphone on the wall, a silent witness to another era. Claire looked around. Besides her, there were only two other people on the platform. An elderly man with a large duffel bag, who briskly dragged it toward the exit without even glancing in her direction, and a young girl in a puffy coat who was immediately met by a guy who hugged her, took her suitcase, and led her away. Claire was left alone. She stood and watched the tail of the departing train. The red lights melted into the darkness until they disappeared completely, then silence. Only the wind and a dog barking somewhere in the distance. The phone in her pocket showed it was just after 1 a.m. Claire looked at the screen. 3 missed calls from Mark. All 3 in the last 4 minutes. She didn't call back, put the phone back in her pocket, and took a deep breath of the night air, cold, smelling of diesel and damp earth. Think, she told herself. Just think. The station was called Havenwood. She had managed to read it on the sign as she got off. A small town in Pennsylvania, it seemed. A long way from Boston, and a long way from New York, too. The cash in her wallet was a little over $200. She had a card, but if Mark wanted to track her movements, and she suddenly realized that was possible, then every transaction would become a beacon. She left the platform and went to the station square. Square was a generous term. A small asphalt patch, a few cars, a closed newsstand, and luckily, a lone car with a taxi light on its roof, parked at the edge of the curb. The driver was dozing, leaning back in his seat. Claire knocked on the window. A man in his late 40s, unshaven, in a jacket with a faux fur collar, opened his eyes and stared at her irritably. Then, he apparently sized up the situation. A young woman, alone, night, a train station. He lowered the window. "Where to?" he asked curtly. "Is there a diner or something that's open now?" Claire asked. Her voice was steadier than she expected. That surprised her. The driver scratched the back of his head. Nothing's 24/7 here, but the transit diner by the bus station stays open till 3 on Fridays. Tonight's Friday. Good timing. Take me there. It was a 7-minute drive. Claire looked out the window at the sleeping town. Dark windows in the houses, occasional streetlights, empty streets. Havenwood turned out to be very small. 3 or 4 streets in the center, low-rise apartment buildings, a few shops. An ordinary small town, like hundreds of others. But tonight, it seemed almost like a sanctuary, precisely because it was a stranger to her. No one here knew her or Mark. The transit diner glowed with a solitary yellow window against the dark street. The sign was simple, unpretentious. The letters were slightly crooked. Inside it was warm, smelling of coffee and something fried. A few tables, half of them empty. A middle-aged man sat at the counter, reading something on his phone. Claire entered, took off her jacket, and sat at a table by the window, far from the entrance, with her back to the wall. An old habit from childhood. Her father always sat like that in restaurants. He said it was to see the whole room. Claire had picked it up without realizing it. A minute or two later, a young man came out from behind the counter. He looked about 28, no older. Medium height, dark hair, simple haircut. An open face, without any flirtatiousness, without the practiced smile people in the service industry often wear. Just a human face. He approached the table and placed a menu in front of her, a single laminated sheet. "Good evening, or is it morning already?" he said. His voice was calm. "Something hot?" "Tea," Claire said, and immediately caught herself. Something tightened inside her. The word had come out automatically, ordinary, domestic, but in that second, it stung her. Tea. Brenda had said, "Don't wake your husband." And there was something in her voice that made Claire flee a train without a second thought. And she still didn't know why. "Are you all right?" the waiter asked quietly. Claire looked up at him. He was watching her without curiosity, just attentively, the way people look when they want to see if help is needed. "Coffee," she corrected herself. "Better make it coffee. Strong." "I can do that." He nodded and went back behind the counter. Claire took out her phone. 7 missed calls from Mark now. She looked at his name on the screen and tried to remember the last time she had felt something real next to him. Not habit, not convenience, not a shared life, but something truly alive. She couldn't remember exactly. The waiter brought the coffee, strong, in a small cup, with a saucer and a sugar packet on the side. He set it down carefully. He was about to leave when Claire suddenly asked, quietly, almost against her will, "Do you know if there's a hostel or something like that around here? I need a place to stay for the night." He stopped. He looked at her for a second, without extra questions, without a smirk. "There's one. It's called the Cozy Nook. On Sovetskaya Street, on Main Street, number 12. It's about a 1-5-minute walk from here, or 3 minutes by car. It's open 24/7. Usually has rooms. Not expensive, thank you. If you want, I can call a cab for you. I have a buddy's number. He'll be here quick." Claire paused for a second, then she nodded. "Yes, please." He went to make the call. Claire gripped the cup with both hands. Her fingers were cold. She stared out the window at the empty night street. Her thoughts wouldn't form into words, just disconnected images and moments circling in her mind. Mark, standing in the train corridor, his steady gaze, not a word. Brenda, leaning over her in the dark compartment. "Don't wake your husband, or you'll regret it." Why did she say that? What did she know? What had happened at all? The waiter returned a few minutes later. "Cab will be here in 10 minutes. He sat at the next table, not too close, at a distance that wasn't intrusive. "My name's Leo," he added, "just in case you need anything." "Claire," she replied. They sat in silence. It wasn't an awkward silence, but rather one where both people understand that nothing needs to be explained. Claire sipped her coffee. Hot, bitter, exactly what she needed. "Do you do this often?" she asked, surprising herself. "Help strangers in the middle of the night?" Leo smiled slightly, a small lift at the corner of his mouth. When I see someone needs help. Yeah, it's not hard. The taxi arrived exactly 10 minutes later. Claire paid for the coffee and put on her jacket. At the door, she turned. Thank you, Leo. Good luck, Claire, he said. She stepped out into the night. The car pulled away down the empty street. Streetlights drifted slowly past the window. Claire watched them and thought of only one thing. In the morning, she had to find Brenda because that woman knew something, and Claire had to find out what it was before she made her next move. The Cozy Nook Hostel was exactly what a hostel with that name should be. Simple, clean, unpretentious. The woman at the reception desk took her money, gave her a key, and didn't ask a single extra question. Claire closed the door to the small room, put her bag on the floor, and lay down on top of the bedspread, still in her jacket. She placed her phone face down. The calls from Mark continued for another hour, then stopped. Claire lay in the dark, listening to the silence of a strange town, and for the first time in a long time, maybe a very long time, she wasn't scared. She felt a simple clarity, the kind you feel when a decision has already been made, even if you don't yet know what it is. Claire woke up at 8:30 in the morning. For a few seconds, she lay motionless, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling low, whitewashed, with a small crack in the corner. Then she remembered everything at once, and it washed over her like a wave, cold, dense, real. The train. Brenda. Mark in the corridor. The night platform. The diner. Leo. The hostel. She sat up in bed and rubbed her face with her hands. Outside, it was a gray morning. The sky was overcast. Drops of rain crawled slowly down the glass. A car engine hummed somewhere below. A building door slammed shut. The ordinary morning of an ordinary small town that had no interest in strangers' stories. Claire picked up her phone. 23 missed calls from Mark. The last one at 6:40 a.m. The third, sent at 3 a.m. Just a period, a single period. Claire stared at it for a long time. A period instead of words. What was it? Confusion? A threat? Or just the exhaustion of someone tired of calling into a void? She didn't know. And it was precisely this not knowing, which she had previously mistaken for marital tranquility, that now seemed crucially important. She didn't know her husband. She didn't know what was hidden behind that smooth, impenetrable facade. Claire washed her face in the small bathroom, changed her clothes. In her bag, she found a clean t-shirt and jeans. She always packed a change of clothes, even for short trips. An editor's habit of being prepared for the unexpected. She drank water from the tap, slipped the phone into her pocket. Now for Brenda. The thought of her hadn't left since she woke up. The attendant knew something. She had come into a stranger's compartment at night, broken every conceivable rule, taken a risk, and said exactly what she had said. People don't do that without a reason. So there was a reason, and Claire had to find it. She opened the browser on her phone and started searching. She found the number for the customer service hotline and called. An automated voice prompted her to wait for an operator. Claire waited for 4 minutes, then a live voice answered, female, tired, professionally polite. Thank you for calling Amtrak. How can I help you? Hello, Claire said evenly. I was a passenger on train number 117 from New York to Boston, yesterday's service. I need to get in touch with the attendant from our car. Her name is Brenda. The car number was 5. A pause. Could you please specify why you wish to contact her? Claire thought for a second. I left a personal item in the car. My phone. I want to check if it was found. It was a lie. Simple, neat, not arousing suspicion. The editor in her had automatically chosen the most plausible version. Please hold, the operator said. Claire waited another 6 minutes, looking out the hostel window at the gray street, the parked cars, a woman with a stroller walking on the sidewalk, her head bowed against the wind. I can forward your request to the service depot, the operator finally said, but we cannot provide employees' personal contact information. I understand, Claire said. In that case, please pass on that passenger, Claire Laren from Car 5 is asking for a call back, and give me the depot's number. I'm prepared to file an official request. She wrote down the number, thanked the operator, and hung up. Then she wrote a short, polite, clear email to the depot's address, specifying the train, car, date, and her phone number. No extra details, just a request for contact with the employee. She sent it. She put the phone back in her pocket. Now all she could do was wait. Claire didn't like waiting. She liked to act. But sometimes, waiting is itself an action. You create the conditions and give them time to work. She understood that. She went downstairs to the hostel's small common kitchen. An elderly man was already sitting there with a newspaper and a mug of tea. He gave her a silent, morning nod. Claire made herself instant coffee, found some crackers in a cupboard left by a previous guest. A note next to them said, "Help yourself." She ate a few, drank her coffee. She thought, 7 months of marriage. They had met almost 2 years ago at a publishing house event where Mark had come with mutual acquaintances. He was different from her usual circle, not wealthy, not a careerist, without the polish and strategy. Just a person. He spoke directly, laughed openly, didn't try to impress. That's what had won her over then. Her father, when he found out, was brief. "You realize he's not your equal?" Claire had replied that she wasn't looking for an equal, she was looking for a person. George Laren had pursed his lips and never brought it up again. But Claire felt he hadn't accepted it. He was just waiting. Now she thought, and what did Dad know that I didn't? The phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. "Hello?" Claire answered, tensing up. "Is this Claire Laren?" The voice was female, older, slightly hoarse. "Yes, this is Brenda. They gave me your message." Claire got up from the table and went into the hallway, away from the elderly man with the newspaper. "Brenda," she said quietly, "you came into our compartment last night. You told me to get off. I want to know why." A long pause. Claire could hear someone walk past Brenda on the other end, hear her turn slightly, covering the phone. "Are you alone right now?" Brenda asked. "Yes." "Good." Another second of silence. Then, as if she had made up her mind, "I'll tell you because I couldn't live with myself if I kept quiet." And she told her. The evening before, around 10 p.m., just after the train had left New York, Brenda was walking through the car, checking compartments, offering tea. She stopped by the compartment where Claire and Mark were, intending to knock and ask if they needed anything, but she didn't knock. The door wasn't fully closed, and a voice was coming from inside. A man's voice, quiet but distinct. Mark was on the phone. Brenda hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She took a step back and heard. "Not everything. A fragment, but enough," Brenda said slowly, as if weighing each word. "He told someone that he would slip something into her tea, that it would look like a heart attack, and that after that, everything would be settled." Claire stood in the hostel corridor and felt the floor beneath her feet become a little less solid. Not fear, something deeper. An understanding, the kind you don't want to accept but can no longer deny. "Did he mention a name?" she asked. Her voice didn't waver. "No. He just said everything would be settled and the old man himself will handle the paperwork later." Or something like that. "I might have misheard something," Brenda added cautiously. "But heart attack and in the tea, I heard that clearly. That's why I came to you. Why not the police? What would I tell them? That I overheard a conversation? It's my word against his. You would have been gone from the train already. You got off at the next station. Zero proof." Brenda's voice became a bit sharper. "I did what I could. I warned you." Claire leaned her back against the corridor wall. "Thank you," she said. "Really, thank you." "Be careful," Brenda replied. "And don't call me on this number again. Just be careful." The call ended. Claire lowered the phone and stared at a spot on the wall for a long time. Then she exhaled slowly. The old man. Mark had said her father, the old man, would handle the paperwork. That meant one thing. Her father was involved. Or Mark thought he was. Or, and this was the most terrifying thought, her father really did know. Claire went back to her room, sat on the bed, and clasped her hands on her knees. 7 months of marriage, insurance, a heart attack, tea. She didn't cry. There were no tears. There was only a cold, sharp clarity, like a shard of glass. And in that clarity, one thought became increasingly distinct. She wouldn't run, she wouldn't hide, she would go back. But first, she would prepare. For the next 2 days, Claire stayed in Havenwood. She didn't go back home, not because she was afraid, but because she understood she needed to return when she was ready, not a moment sooner. To return, now confused, without a plan, without proof, would be to hand the initiative to someone else. And Claire had no intention of doing that. On Saturday morning, the day after her conversation with Brenda, she left the hostel and walked through the unfamiliar town. Just walked, without a destination, without a route. Havenwood turned out to be a quiet place. Old 2-story houses, along the main street, a small market, a church with a gilded steeple, a small square with benches. People here nodded to strangers, a brief, no-fuss greeting. Claire nodded back. She thought. The conversation with Brenda replayed in her mind, over and over, not as a nightmare, but as a problem to be solved. Claire knew how to translate the emotional into the practical. It helped her at the publishing house when a manuscript fell apart and she had to find its structure. It was the same now. There were facts, there were gaps, there were questions without answers. Fact 1. Mark was on the phone talking about putting something in her tea. Brenda heard it. Fact 2. Play. Mark mentioned her father, George Laren. What exactly he meant was unclear. Either her father was an accomplice, or Mark was counting on his father-in-law to process the inheritance in some way after his wife's death. Insurance. Claire remembered, 6 months ago, Mark had suggested they get life insurance, just in case. He'd said, "We're a family now. We have to think about the future." She had signed the papers without reading them. Now she wanted to know for how much. Fact 3. Mark had stood in the train corridor and silently watched her leave. He didn't call out, didn't run after her, just watched. That wasn't the behavior of a scared or confused person. It was the behavior of a person who was calculating. Gap 1. She didn't know who Mark was talking to. Brenda's testimony was the only evidence, and it would be worthless in court. Gap 2. She didn't know what he planned to put in her drink or where that substance was now. Gap 3. She didn't know if her father was aware of the plan. Claire bought a notepad and a pen at a small shop, an old habit. She always thought better when she wrote by hand. She returned to the hostel, sat at the desk by the window, and started writing. Not emotions, just a structure. What do I know? What do I need to find out? What do I need to do? By Saturday evening, she had a plan. Not final, but workable. First, return home, but not right away, in a few days. Give Mark time. Let him think she was lost, scared, that she had run away in a panic. Let him relax. Second, upon her return, play a role. The naive wife who got scared by some strange dream or a nervous breakdown, who has come back and wants to reconcile, who knows nothing. Third, provoke him into saying something incriminating. This was the hardest part, but it was possible. People who think they are smarter than others eventually say too much, especially when they believe they are not in danger. Fourth, a recording device, a recorded conversation. Without it, she had nothing. Fifth, the lawyer, the prenuptial agreement. She remembered that before the wedding, her father had insisted on a prenup. Quietly, without a scene, he had just said, "Sign this." It's standard practice. Mark had grimaced at the time but signed. Claire, to be honest, hadn't really read the document. Now she needed to find it and read it carefully. She closed the notepad and looked out the window. It was getting dark outside. The early autumn twilight was falling quickly on the town. People walked down the street with shopping bags. Someone was walking a bicycle. An old man was feeding pigeons in the square. They were living their lives, knowing nothing of her story. And that was for the best. On Sunday morning, Claire found herself at the transit diner again. She hadn't planned to go there. She had just taken a walk toward the bus station and found that her feet had led her to the familiar yellow window. She went in. It wasn't crowded inside. An elderly couple at a far table, 2 men with a road map, a young waitress behind the counter, and Leo. He was standing by the coffee machine, adjusting something on it with the focused expression of someone who has done this many times and knows its every mechanism. He noticed Claire immediately, looked up, and a flicker of what looked like mild, genuine surprise crossed his face. "Claire," he said, simply, as if they had known each other for a long time. "Leo," she replied in the same tone, "can I take your table again?" "Any table is your table." He gestured toward the dining area. "Coffee?" "Coffee." She sat down at the window again. Leo brought the coffee quickly, and this time didn't leave right away. He placed the cup down, paused for a second, then sat across from her, not intrusively, but like someone asking for permission, with just a gesture. "You stayed in town," he said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "For a few days," Claire replied. "Is everything okay?" She looked at him. Leo's gaze was calm, without curiosity, without a desire to pry out her story. He just looked, and there was something in that look that made you want to tell the truth. "Not entirely," she said honestly, "but I'll figure it out." He nodded, accepting it as an answer, without follow-up questions, without advice, without a, "Maybe you need help?" He just accepted it. Claire appreciated that silence more than any words. They started talking later, not right away. Gradually, as happens when two people sit near each other long enough, and the silence naturally turns into words. Leo told her he had been working at the transit for 3 years. He had come from a neighboring town, wanting to save up for his own business. It wasn't going very well yet, but he wasn't in a hurry. He spoke without self-pity, just stating facts. Claire told him she worked as an editor, nothing about the train, nothing about Mark. That wasn't a conversation for her, not now. But there was something about that Sunday morning, in that diner with the crooked sign and the coffee in a small cup, that was so simple and real that Claire caught herself thinking she couldn't remember the last time she had just sat like this, without anxiety, without playing a role, without needing to calculate her words beforehand. Just sitting, just talking, just being. It didn't last long, about an hour. Then Leo got up. New customers had arrived. He had to work. He cleared the cups, smiled goodbye, the same quiet smile as the first time. "Come back, anytime," he said. "I will," Claire replied. On Monday morning, she packed her bag, checked out of the hostel, and bought a bus ticket to the nearest major station where a commuter train ran to New York City. She paid in cash, so as not to leave a trail prematurely. Before leaving, she opened her notepad and reread what she had written on Saturday. The plan hadn't changed. She closed the notepad and put it in her bag. It was time to go home. The commuter train arrived in New York City at 2:30 in the afternoon. Claire stepped onto the platform at Grand Central Terminal and immediately felt the familiar city rhythm, dense, fast, indifferent. The crowd carried her forward, past newsstands and turnstiles, past people with and without suitcases, past a police officer looking bored by a column. New York hadn't noticed her absence. New York never notices anything. She didn't go home right away. First, the lawyer. On the bus, as the suburban forest stretched outside the window, Claire had found the number for Olivia Safran, a lawyer a colleague from the publishing house had once recommended. A woman in her 50s, specializing in family law, with a reputation for being thorough and reliable. Claire called her right from the bus and asked for an urgent meeting. Olivia, without asking unnecessary questions, scheduled a time for 4 p.m. The lawyer's office was in Midtown East, small, austere, with wood-paneled walls and shelves, packed tightly with files. Olivia Safran was exactly as Claire had imagined her. Short, wearing glasses with a thin frame, with short-cropped, dark hair, and the gaze of someone who is hard to surprise. Claire told her everything. Almost everything. Without Brenda, without the train, without details that had no legal weight yet. She said the main thing. She had reason to believe her husband posed a threat to her. She wanted to know her rights, and she wanted to find the prenuptial agreement. Olivia listened silently, without interrupting. Then she took off her glasses, polished them with the edge of her blazer, slowly, thoughtfully, and put them back on. "Do you have the prenuptial agreement?" she asked. "I should. We signed one before the wedding. The original is at home in a file with our documents. I didn't read it carefully." "That's the first thing you need to do," Olivia said. "Read it carefully. Bring me a copy." She made a note in her legal pad. Second, if you are planning a divorce with a subsequent division of assets, you need grounds. If there's a threat to your life, that's a criminal matter, and it has its own logic. But without evidence, neither a criminal case nor even a normal divorce with favorable terms will go smoothly. I understand, Claire said. I'm working on the evidence. Olivia looked at her over her glasses, attentively, appraisingly. Are you safe right now? Yes, for now. Yes, good. Then proceed carefully, and don't do anything without consulting me first. Claire left the office a little after 5. It was already getting dark outside. The streetlights were coming on one by one along the avenue. She stood at the entrance for a minute, gathering her thoughts. Then she called a taxi to go home. The apartment met her with silence. Mark was home. She saw his shoes by the door and the light on in the kitchen. Claire took off her jacket, hung it on the hook, and put down her bag slowly, calmly. She gave herself 3 seconds. Inhale, exhale. The roll was on. He came out of the kitchen when he heard the door. He stopped in the doorway, looked at her, and again, that same expression she had seen in the train corridor, flat, emotionless, impenetrable. Then something in him shifted slightly. It didn't soften, but it changed. "You're back," he said. "I'm back," Claire replied. She let her voice sound a little guilty, just enough to be natural. "Mark, I need to explain something. I'm listening." She walked into the kitchen, sat at the table in her usual spot, and glanced around. Everything was as it had been. 2 mugs on the shelf, the refrigerator with a magnet from a trip they took last year. Their cat, Buttons, was napping on the windowsill. A normal apartment, a normal life that, it turned out, was just a set. "I got scared," Claire said. She looked at the table, not at him. It was more convincing that way. "I don't know what came over me. Something just hit me on the train. A panic attack, I guess. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out, and I did." She looked up. "It was stupid, I know." Mark stood by the stove, leaning back against it, watching her. He was silent for a few seconds. "A panic attack," he repeated. His voice was even, almost neutral. Almost. "I don't understand it myself. I was probably just tired." She managed a small, embarrassed, conciliatory smile. "I'm sorry I didn't answer your calls. I needed to be alone and calm down." He walked over to the table and sat across from her. He looked at her for a long time, studying her, the way one looks at a problem without an obvious solution. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. "It happens." He accepted it too easily. Claire noted this internally, without any outward reaction. A person who had been genuinely worried for 2 days of uncertainty wouldn't just say, "It happens." He would have asked questions, been angry, demanded explanations. Mark accepted her version immediately because it was convenient for him, because it returned the situation to the track he wanted it on. That evening, they had dinner together. Mark reheated soup, set the table. Claire ate and talked about insignificant things, the weather, a book she had picked up from the hostel's free shelf. Mark answered in short sentences. The tension beneath the surface of the conversation was like a taut string. They both felt it, both pretended they didn't. After dinner, when Mark went to watch TV, Claire went into their room under the pretext of unpacking. She opened the desk drawer where they kept documents and found the file, a thick, blue folder with ties. She opened it. The prenuptial agreement was there. 6 pages, fine print, a notary seal. She read it slowly, absorbing every clause. Her father, it turned out, had been very thorough. The agreement was drafted so that, in the event of a divorce, all assets acquired before the marriage, which included Claire's apartment and a share in a small fund her father had set up for her 3 years ago, remained hers. Jointly acquired property was to be divided in half, but with a condition. If there was proven intent against the life or health of the spouse, everything would go to her. Claire reread that clause twice. Her father had known, not about the specific plan, but he knew Mark was unreliable. That was why he had insisted on the agreement. That was why he had so carefully, without explanation, included that clause. She photographed every page of the agreement with her phone, put the folder back, and left the room. Mark was lying on the couch with his phone and didn't look up. Claire went into the bathroom, locked the door, and took a small digital recorder out of her makeup bag. She had bought it on her way home at an electronics store near the subway, paying with cash. It was barely bigger than a lighter. She tested the recording. It worked clearly. She looked at herself in the mirror. Pale, dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was steady. Now the hardest part began. For the next 4 days, Claire lived in a state that demanded more from her than any job. Every morning she woke up next to Mark, said good morning in a steady voice, made coffee for two, and asked how he had slept. Every evening she sat down for dinner together, told some trivial story about the publishing house, laughed at the right moments. The role of the naive, forgiving wife who had been scared by her own nerves and now wanted to forget everything, this role required constant attention. She couldn't overact. She couldn't underact. She had to be just right. A little guilty, a little soft, completely undemanding. Mark seemed to relax by the second day. Claire watched him quietly, with her peripheral vision, the way you watch a text you need to edit, not focusing on details, but sensing the overall tone. And the tone was changing. The first day he was wary, answered curtly, looked at her a little longer than necessary. By the third day, he was more talkative. By the fourth, he was almost back to normal. The Mark she had known at the beginning of their relationship, confident, calm, slightly condescending. It was this condescension she had been waiting for. It meant one thing. He had stopped being afraid of her. The recorder was in her pocket every day. Small, flat, turned on with a single flick of her thumb. Claire tested the recording several times in different rooms, at different distances. The sound was clear. The main thing was to be close enough. On Thursday evening, she made dinner herself, a rare occurrence in their household. Usually, they took turns cooking. She put a bottle of wine Mark liked on the table. She lit a small candle she had bought at a corner store that day. It was all part of the set dressing. An atmosphere of trust. An atmosphere of, we're back together, everything is fine. Mark came home from work, saw the set table, and raised his eyebrows slightly. What's the occasion? He asked. No occasion, Claire replied. She smiled softly, without overdoing it. I just missed a normal evening at home. He took off his shoes, changed, and sat at the table. Claire poured the wine. They clinked glasses quietly, glass on glass. Mark took a sip, nodded approvingly. Claire held her glass in her hand and barely drank. The conversation was easy, too easy, as it is when both people are talking about superficial things without touching the depths. Mark talked about work. They were launching a new line at the plant. Something was wrong with a supplier. The shift supervisor was on edge. Claire listened, nodded, asked clarifying questions. Not because she was interested, but because it was the right script to follow. The attentive wife. The interested wife. After the second glass, Mark softened a bit. His shoulders slumped, his voice warmed. Claire chose her moment. Mark, she said quietly, I want to ask you something. Don't be offended. He looked at her calmly, without tension. Ask away. Dad called me yesterday. This was true. George Laren had indeed called, briefly, to ask if everything was okay. Claire had said yes. He said something strange, that you and he had a conversation about the insurance. It was a test. A cautious first step on thin ice. Claire didn't know for sure if such a conversation had happened, but she could learn a lot from Mark's reaction. His expression didn't change, but his fingers, holding the wine glass, tightened slightly, almost imperceptibly. And what exactly was he interested in? Technical details, payouts, terms. He's a businessman. You know how he gets into the details. Mark smirked briefly, a little dismissively. Wants to control everything that concerns you. Claire nodded slowly, as if thinking it over. That's true, she agreed. Dad's like that. A pause. And is the policy for a large amount? Standard. He put the glass on the table. Claire, what are you getting at? Nothing. She raised her gaze, making it open, a little confused. It's just that Dad hinted that you called him first. And I thought, You could have told me if you were planning something. Mark was silent for a second. Then he smiled, and this smile was right, domestic, the one she knew. I just want us to have everything secure, he said. We're a family. I'm thinking about the future. About the future, Claire noted. Exactly. The conversation drifted to other things. The evening ended peacefully, but something important had happened. Mark had confirmed that the conversation with her father had taken place, that the policy existed, and that he himself had initiated that conversation. It wasn't enough. She needed more. The real moment came the next day. On Friday, unexpectedly, as the things you've been waiting for often do, Claire was working from home, editing a manuscript at her desk in the bedroom. Mark hadn't gone in for his shift. He said he'd taken a day off. He was in the living room, talking on the phone. Claire could hear his voice through the slightly ajar door, a steady, business-like tone. Then, his voice got quieter. Claire put down the manuscript, took the recorder out of her pocket, stood up, and quietly approached the door. She left it as it was, not opening it any wider. She pressed record and stood by the wall next to the doorway. I'm telling you, everything is fine. She's back. She's calmed down. Mark's voice was low, tense. Yeah, a nervous breakdown. She said so herself. A pause. No, we don't need to cancel anything. We'll just wait a bit. 3, maybe 4 weeks. Let things settle down. Another, longer pause. George Laren said the policy is solid. Standard payout, there won't be any questions. The doctor is, yes, the same one. Everything's ready. We just don't need to rush. His voice became a whisper. She doesn't know anything. I'm sure of it. Claire stood by the wall, not moving. She breathed evenly, deliberately, by sheer force of will. Her heart was beating fast, but her mind was cold and clear. He had said, "The doctor is ready." This meant the plan was concrete, not an abstract intention but a prepared scheme, with accomplices, with medical cover, and her father? George Laren, the policy is solid. Claire didn't know if her father was a full participant or just a convenient tool in Mark's hands, a man whose name and connections made the scheme plausible. That would have to be figured out separately. But right now, it didn't matter. What mattered was that the recording was running. She stood by the wall for about 2 more minutes. Mark finished the call, and she heard him get up from the couch. Claire silently returned to her desk, put the recorder in her pocket, and picked up the manuscript. When Mark looked into the room a minute later, nonchalantly, she was sitting and reading, a slight frown on her face as she looked at the page. Need something? She asked, looking up. No, he said. Just checking. I'll probably be working for another couple of hours. Okay. He left. Claire put the manuscript on the desk, put her hand in her pocket, and squeezed the recorder. Small, warm, from her body. Now, she had what she needed. All that was left was the last, most important step. On Saturday morning, Claire called Olivia Saffron. The lawyer answered immediately, as if she had been expecting the call. Claire said briefly, I have a recording. Olivia asked her to come to the office within 2 hours. Claire told Mark she was going to the publishing house. An urgent edit. The author was waiting. Mark nodded without looking up from his phone. She took her bag and left. The street was gray and cold. Late November was making itself known. Claire walked to the subway at a brisk pace, her hands in her pockets. Her left hand was on the recorder. She hadn't let go of it since she made the recording, as if afraid it would disappear. Olivia Saffron's office was warm and quiet. The lawyer greeted her without preamble, gestured to a chair, placed the recorder on the desk between them, and pressed play. They listened together. The recording was clear. Mark's voice was recognizable, calm, businesslike. 3, maybe 4 weeks. The doctor is ready. The policy is solid. She doesn't know anything. Olivia stopped the recording, took off her glasses, and placed them on the desk next to the recorder. For a few seconds, she looked out the window in silent concentration. This is serious, she said at last. Very serious. I understand. The recording was made without his knowledge? In this country's legal system, that's a gray area. It might be admitted by a court as circumstantial evidence, especially in conjunction with other facts. But on its own, it's not enough for a criminal case. There's no specific substance mentioned, no direct confession, no names of accomplices. The lawyer paused. For a divorce, it's a different story. Here, this works. I don't want to send him to prison, Claire said. Olivia looked at her attentively. Explain. If I go to the police, an investigation starts. I'll be dragged into questioning. It will stretch on for years. His lawyer will tear the recording apart. He'll say, it's edited, out of context, a provocation. The doctor, he mentioned, is probably just an acquaintance they'll never find. Claire spoke evenly, without anger. I want something else. I want to get out of this marriage in a way that leaves him with nothing, and so that he knows why. Olivia looked at her for a long time. Then she gave a slight, respectful nod, the kind you give when someone says something you can't disagree with. Have you studied the prenuptial agreement? Yes. I photographed every page. Claire took out her phone, found the images, and showed them to the lawyer. Olivia swiped slowly, reading carefully. Her face remained professionally calm, but at one point, the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. Not a smile, but something close. Your father is a very prudent man, she said. I'm beginning to understand that. Clause 4. Paragraph 3. The lawyer tapped the phone screen. Upon proven intent against the life or health of the spouse, all jointly acquired property transfers to her in its entirety. This is notarized, it's legal, and it's your primary tool. How do I prove that in a divorce case if the recording is circumstantial? The recording plus a witness testimony, Olivia said. You have someone who heard his conversation on the train. If she is willing to testify, even in the form of a written statement that constitutes a body of evidence, a court doesn't always require a criminal conviction to apply such a clause in a prenuptial agreement. A convincing evidentiary basis in a civil proceeding is often sufficient. Claire thought of Brenda, of how she had spoken cautiously, in a low voice, clearly understanding the risk she was taking. I'll try to talk to her, she said. Good. Olivia made a few notes. Now, about your father. You said Mark mentioned him in the recording. George Laren said the policy is solid. That could imply your father's awareness of the plan. Claire was silent for a second. Or that Mark was using his name for credibility in the conversation. To make his accomplice believe everything was approved at the highest level. Possibly, the lawyer agreed. Are you prepared to talk to your father? Yes. Today? Claire left Olivia's office with a clear plan of action and a copy of the prenuptial agreement on her phone. She called her father not from the subway, but right at the building's entrance, in the cold November wind. George Laren answered on the second ring. Claire. His voice was dry, businesslike, as always. Dad, I need to see you. Today. It's important. A short pause. Come by at 6. Her father lived in the city, on the Upper East Side. A large apartment on the 8th floor, overlooking the park. Claire arrived exactly at 6. George Laren opened the door himself. The housekeeper didn't work on Saturdays. He was dressed casually, a dark sweater, slacks, slippers. Without a suit jacket, he looked older. Or maybe she just had never noticed before. They sat in his study. It was always like this when the conversation was serious. Her father at his desk, Claire in the armchair opposite. Just like in her childhood, when she had to explain her grades. Mark called you about the insurance policy, she said without preamble. You spoke with him about it recently. Her father looked at her steadily, without rushing. I did, he said. About what, exactly? He was asking about the payout conditions. Technical details. George Laren narrowed his eyes slightly. How do you know? I heard his conversation. Claire took out the recorder and played the recording. Her father listened, without moving. As the recording played, his face grew harder. When the phrase George Laren said, "The policy is solid," was spoken, he exhaled slowly, a long breath through his nose. Claire stopped the recording. The silence lasted for probably half a minute. I didn't know, her father said. His voice was quiet, without its usual business-like dryness. He asked about the policy like it was a normal question. I didn't understand what he needed it for. I thought it was just standard financial prudence. You never liked him from the start. I didn't, George Laren agreed without a pause. But this is different. I didn't wish you dead, Claire. She looked at him for a long time, studying him, searching for a lie. She didn't find one. Her father was good at hiding many things, but not this. He was genuinely shaken. He used you, she said. Your name, your words, your authority, to convince an accomplice that everything was approved. George Laren stood up from his desk, walked to the window, and stood there for a minute, looking down at the evening park below. What are you planning to do? He asked. A divorce, Claire answered. According to the prenuptial agreement, he'll leave with nothing. The police? No. Her father turned around, looked at her, and in his eyes, there was something she had never seen before. Not pride, something more complex, something like respect, which he didn't know how to express with words. Is Brenda willing to testify? He asked unexpectedly. Claire was surprised. He had listened to the recording carefully. I haven't asked her yet, but I will. I'll help with the lawyer, George Laren said. The best. No arguments. Olivia Saffron can handle it, Claire replied calmly. Her father gave a slight nod. He accepted it. Claire left his apartment at 7:30. In the taxi, she looked out the dark window and thought that for the first time in many years, a conversation with her father had ended not in tense silence, but with something resembling understanding. Perhaps, for that to happen, they both needed a story exactly like this one. Ugly, dangerous, real. At home, Mark was in the kitchen with his laptop. He asked how things went at the publishing house. Claire replied, Fine, the edits took a long time. He nodded. She went to her room, closed the door, and took out her phone. She wrote a short message to Brenda. I need your help. Please call me back when you can. It's important. She sent it. She put the phone on the desk. It was getting dark outside. There was only one step left to the finale. Brenda called back on Sunday morning. Claire was alone. Mark had gone to the plant despite it being the weekend. He said he needed to deal with the supplier. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee when her phone vibrated. An unknown number, but she already knew whose voice it would be. This is Brenda, she said. Her voice was cautious, like the first time, like someone opening the door to an unfamiliar knock slowly, with the chain on. Brenda, it's Claire, the passenger from car 5. A pause. I remember you asked me not to call, but I messaged you, and you called me back. I think that means you're willing to talk. A short silence on the other end. What do you need? Brenda asked. I need you to repeat what you told me on the phone, but officially, a written statement. We can do it at a notary's office. Just what you personally heard. The date, the train, the car, the words. Nothing extra. This is for a court? Brenda's voice tensed. No, it's a civil case for a divorce for now, not criminal. No one will drag you through depositions and interrogations. Just a notarized witness statement that you heard that conversation? Claire spoke calmly, clearly, without pressure. I understand, I'm asking a lot. You're taking a risk. But what you did on the train, you already took a risk. I'm alive only because of what you did. The silence on the other end was long. Claire didn't rush her. Where's the notary? Brenda finally asked. I'll arrange everything. You just need to show up. I'll cover your travel and time. Another pause. Okay, Brenda said quietly, but only once, and no more calls after this. Deal. Thank you. Brenda hung up. Claire placed the phone on the table and exhaled slowly. One by one, the pieces were falling into place, like the pages of a manuscript finally finding its structure. The recording. The prenuptial agreement. Brenda's statement. The lawyer. Everything was gathered now. Only one element remained. Mark had to say it himself. Not under pressure, not in response to an accusation, but voluntarily, in a conversation he would consider safe, where he would be confident that she knew nothing, suspected nothing, was recording nothing. This was the most difficult step, because provoking someone to be candid when you know what Claire knew about him required a cool head and absolute self-control. No wavering in her voice, no stray glance, no pause that would say too much. Mark came back from the plant at 6 p.m., tired and annoyed. He said the negotiations with the supplier had hit a dead end. The shift supervisor was acting like an idiot. Everything was falling apart. Claire listened, heated up dinner, poured him tea. He sat at the table and gradually calmed down. She knew how to create that atmosphere, that comforting, domestic mood. After dinner, she cleared the table and came back. The recorder in the pocket of her house sweater had been on since before he got home. "Mark," she said, sitting across from him, "I want to talk." Seriously. He looked at her attentively, but without alarm. "I'm listening. I've been thinking these past few days. Thinking a lot." She lowered her gaze, then raised it slowly, like someone gathering courage. "I feel like something is wrong between us. Has been for a while. Don't you feel it?" Mark was silent for a second. "What exactly do you mean? I don't know." Claire spoke quietly, a little uncertainly. Exactly how people speak when they're afraid to hear the truth. "Sometimes I feel like you're closed off, that I don't know what you're thinking, that there's something between us that you're not telling me." Mark looked at her. Something flickered in his eyes fast, almost imperceptible. Not alarm, more like calculation. He was weighing his options. "What specifically are you talking about?" he asked cautiously. "About Dad, maybe," Claire said. "You talked to him. About the policy. I know." She looked at him openly, almost naively. "I'm not against it, it's just, why didn't you tell me? We're a family." Mark relaxed slightly. She saw it in his shoulders. "I didn't want to burden you with financial details," he said. "It's all for our peace of mind. If something happens, you'll be protected." "What could happen?" Claire asked softly, almost childishly. He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, slowly, like someone deciding to confide. "Life is unpredictable, Claire. People die. Sometimes unexpectedly. A heart attack, for example. Young people die from heart attacks too. It happens." "You're scaring me," she said. Her voice trembled slightly. But it was the right kind of tremor, scared, not revealing. "I'm not scaring you." He covered her hand with his. "I'm just telling it like it is. I want you to be okay. Whatever happens, to me." "To me?" Claire repeated quietly. "To both of us," he corrected. Quickly, almost automatically. But it was too late. The slip had been made. Claire nodded slowly, trustingly. "You're looking out for me," she said. "Of course. I'm your husband." He removed his hand, leaned back in his chair. The conversation ended there. Mark went to the living room and turned on the TV. Claire sat at the table for a few more minutes, then stood up, went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stopped the recording. She pressed play, rewound to the right spot. A heart attack, for example. Young people die from heart attacks too. It happens to me, to both of us. A small slip, almost invisible, but recorded. In the context of the first recording, Brenda's testimony, and the prenuptial agreement, it was exactly what she needed. The next day, Monday, while Mark was at the plant, Claire called Olivia Safran and forwarded both recordings. The lawyer listened to them and said succinctly, "That's enough. File for divorce. I'll have the documents ready by Thursday." On Wednesday, Brenda arrived. They met at a notary's office near City Hall. Claire, Olivia, and Brenda. The attendant looked the same as she had on the train. Older, stout, with the tired face of someone who works hard and rests little. She shook Claire's hand, a dry, brief gesture. No hugs, no extra words. She gave her statement clearly. Date, train, car number. What she heard, as verbatim as she could recall. The notary certified it. The whole thing took less than an hour. When they went outside, Claire stopped next to Brenda. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. Brenda looked at her directly, without sentimentality. "Don't," she replied. "I did what I had to do. Anyone would have. Not anyone." Brenda gave a slight shrug, like someone uncomfortable with gratitude. "Live well," she said. And she walked away at a brisk pace, without looking back, disappearing into the crowd on the busy street. Claire watched her go. Olivia Safran touched her elbow. The documents will be ready on Thursday. We file for divorce on Friday. Mark will receive the notice at his registered address. He won't be expecting this, Claire said. That's exactly why we're filing quickly, the lawyer replied. While he thinks he has time, they parted ways. Claire went down into the subway and rode home, holding onto the handrail in the car, staring at her reflection in the dark glass opposite. A young woman, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, in a dark jacket, almost a stranger. The one who knew how to face the truth. 2 days remained until Friday. On Thursday evening, Olivia Safran emailed the documents. Claire opened the files on her laptop in the bedroom with the door closed, while Mark watched TV in the living room. She read carefully, not rushing, the way you read a text where you can't miss a single word. The petition for dissolution of marriage. The attachment with the prenuptial agreement. A reference to Clause 4, Paragraph 3. A brief legal justification spanning 3 pages, dry, precise, devoid of emotion, exactly as it should be. Olivia had written separately. We file tomorrow at 10 a.m. Come with the original documents and your ID. The notice will be mailed to Mark and should arrive within 3 business days, not sooner. You have time. Claire closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a few minutes. The TV mumbled behind the door, occasional laughter from some show. A normal evening in a normal apartment, the last one. She didn't feel triumphant, nor did she feel fear. It was something else, quiet, almost calm, like on an airplane when the engines have reached full power and there's no turning back. You just fly. On Friday morning, she got up before Mark, made coffee, drank it standing by the window, quickly, while he was still asleep. She got dressed, took the bag with the documents she had packed the night before. She wrote on a piece of paper, briefly, without explanation, went out to run errands. We'll be back this evening. She left it on the kitchen table. She left, closing the door quietly. She and Olivia were at the courthouse at 9:45. The lawyer reviewed the original documents, made copies, placed tabs. At 10:02, she filed the petition electronically through the court system. She printed out the confirmation and handed it to Claire. Now we wait, Olivia said. The first hearing will be in about 3 weeks, tentatively. Mark will receive the notice within 3 business days. As soon as he gets it, it will begin. Be ready. For what, exactly? Claire asked. For him to call, or show up, or both. The lawyer put the papers in her briefcase. The main thing is, no conversations without me. Every word he says, every argument, it all goes through me. You are not obligated to explain anything to him personally. Okay, Claire said. She left the office at 11:30 and went not home, but to her father's. George Laren was waiting for her. The table was set simply, without ceremony. Tea, sandwiches, a small plate of cookies. For him, this was a gesture. Claire knew it. They were sitting in the kitchen, for the first time in many years, it seemed. Usually, her father received her in his study. The kitchen was a different space, less formal, less defended. Her father apparently understood this. Did you file? He asked. Yes, this morning. George Laren nodded, sipped his tea. He was silent for a few seconds. I want to tell you something, he said finally. His voice was unfamiliar, without its businesslike harshness, quieter than usual. I know I was wrong. Back at the wedding, and before that, when I pressured you. He looked at her directly, without guile. I don't know how to apologize, but you know that. I know, Claire said. The prenuptial agreement. I insisted on it precisely because I didn't trust him. I had no proof, just a feeling. Something about him was off. I couldn't explain it. I just saw it. Her father put his cup on the table. I thought I was just taking a legal precaution. I never thought it would go this far. You saved my life with that agreement, Dad, Claire said. Without even knowing it. George Laren stared at the table. There was something vulnerable in his face, like a man used to wearing armor who had suddenly taken it off in an unexpected place. You handled it yourself, he said. I had very little to do with it. You were involved, just in your own way. They sat in silence. Outside, the city hummed distant, familiar. What now? Her father asked. Court. In 3 weeks. According to the prenup, he gets nothing that was mine before the marriage. As for joint property, we acquired almost nothing in 7 months. We rented the apartment, no car. Claire spoke evenly. He'll leave with what he came with. He won't go to jail? No, she said. There's not enough evidence for a criminal case, the lawyer explained. I don't want to spend years on it. Her father narrowed his eyes slightly. She expected an objection, but he only nodded. You've decided, so be it. That, too, was a gesture. A very big one for George Laren. Mark received the notice of the petition on Monday. Olivia Saffron called Claire to inform her that the document had been delivered to his registered address. 40 minutes after that call, Claire's phone vibrated. Mark. She didn't answer. The next call came 3 minutes later. Then another. Then a text. Claire, we need to talk. Immediately. She wrote to Olivia. The reply was swift. Do not respond. Let him go through the court. Claire put her phone away. Mark came that evening. She heard him opening the door with his key. Claire was sitting in the kitchen. When he walked in, she looked at him calmly, without challenge, without fear. He looked different than usual. The mask had slipped. Not completely, but enough. His face showed confusion, beneath which lay something hard and cold. What is this? He was holding a printout of the notice. What did you do? I filed for divorce, Claire said evenly. On what grounds? You'll get all the papers through the court. Everything is explained there. Claire, he took a step closer. His voice became quieter, almost soft, almost convincing. I don't know what they've told you, what you're thinking, but you're making a mistake. We can talk about this calmly, like adults. My lawyer says we talk through the court, she repeated. Are you serious? There was a sharp edge to his voice now, completely. He looked at her for a long time. She held his gaze, didn't look away, didn't tense up, just looked back, and he saw it. He saw that she wasn't scared, that she knew, that everything had already been done neatly, irreversibly, professionally. That the game was lost. Something in him deflated slowly, like a drop in pressure. The prenuptial agreement, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. He just said it aloud, like someone putting the pieces of a puzzle together in his head. Claire didn't reply. Mark put the notice on the table, stood for a second, then silently turned and walked out of the apartment. The door closed quietly, without a slam, without a word. Claire sat in the kitchen for a few more minutes. Then she stood up, put his mug, the one he hadn't had a chance to use, in the sink. She opened the window. The November air was cold and clean. The court hearing took place 3 weeks later. It was quick, by the standards of such cases. Olivia Saffron worked efficiently. The evidence was presented meticulously. The prenuptial agreement left no room for maneuver. Mark came with a lawyer, a young guy, clearly hired in a hurry. He tried to contest the terms of the agreement, but to no avail. Notarized, both signatures, dated a month before the wedding. All legal, all clean. The judge announced the decision at the end of the second session. Marriage dissolved, property claims to be settled according to the prenuptial agreement. Mark walked out of the courtroom with nothing, literally. The apartment was Claire's from before the marriage. There were almost no joint savings. She had packed his things in advance and had her lawyer deliver them. On the courthouse steps, he stopped beside her for a second. She didn't turn away. You're smart, he said quietly, without anger, more with the same cold respect one has for an opponent who was underestimated. Yes, Claire replied. Simply. He walked away. She watched him go, but not for long. Then she turned to Olivia Saffron, who was standing beside her with a briefcase under her arm. It's over, the lawyer said succinctly. It's over, Claire agreed. It was cold outside. December was taking hold. The first snow lay on the sidewalks in a thin, almost transparent layer. Claire turned up the collar of her jacket and walked toward the subway. As she walked, she thought about one thing. In Havenwood, it was probably snowing too, and at the Transit Diner, if it was open in December, it was probably warm and smelled of coffee. And Leo was possibly standing by the coffee machine, adjusting it with that same focused expression. She took out her phone, found the number she had saved back then, on that Sunday morning when she left the diner. Just in case, just because, she stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, oblivious to the people walking past. She wrote a short message. "Leo, it's Claire, the one you found a hostel for in November. If you remember, I'd like to come visit. Soon." She sent it, put her phone away, and continued walking, feeling lighter than she had a minute ago. Leo replied 20 minutes later. Claire had already entered the subway and was standing on the platform when her phone vibrated in her pocket. She took it out, read the message, and felt something warm and simple rise in her chest. Not excitement, not euphoria, just a quiet joy, the kind that doesn't need explaining. "I remember. Come on over. The coffee will be ready." Just 8 words. No extra questions. No what happened. No why so long. Just come on over. Claire reread the message twice. Then she smiled. For the first time in many weeks, a real smile, not part of a role. She got back to her apartment at 6:30 in the evening. The apartment greeted her with silence, a familiar, personal silence now. Mark's things had been gone for a week, ever since the lawyer had delivered the packed bags to him. Claire walked through the rooms and realized she wasn't sad. The space didn't feel empty, it felt free. The difference was huge. She opened her closet and started packing a bag. Not rushing, thoughtfully, the way you pack when you're going somewhere you want to go. A sweater she loved, soft, dark green, bought 2 years ago at a market in Boston. Jeans, a book she had long put off and never started. Minimal makeup. A charger. A notepad and pen. The next morning, a Saturday, she called her boss, Victor, with whom she had worked for 4 years. She explained briefly. She needed a few days. He didn't object. Claire never abused such requests. "Take some rest," he said simply. The train to upstate New York left at 10 a.m. from Grand Central. Claire arrived at the station at 9:30, bought a ticket, this time a regular one, in a coach seat, no sleeping car. She stood on the platform, looking at the train. The smell of the railroad, the hum of engines, the announcer's voice over the speakers. It was all the same as it had been a month ago. But she was different. In the car, she sat by the window, put her bag on the rack, and took out her book. She read for a little while, then just looked out the window as the city slowly receded and the suburbs began. Winter fields, patches of forest, dusted with snow, occasional towns with dark roofs. The sky was low and whitish, but through the clouds, somewhere near the horizon, a strip of pale December sun was breaking through. The journey to the connecting station took just over 2 hours. There, she transferred to a bus to Havenwood. The bus ride was an hour and 20 minutes. Claire sat by the window and thought, not about the past month, not about the court, not about Mark. She thought about what would come next. Not in specifics, not in bullet points, just about what that next might be. The job she loved, the apartment that was now only hers. A father with whom it seemed something was beginning to change. And Havenwood, a small town where she had spent 2 days in November and from which she had left a different person. The bus pulled into the Havenwood bus station at 2:30 in the afternoon. Claire got off, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and looked around. The town was just as she remembered it, quiet, small, unhurried. Only now, it was covered in snow. The sidewalks were cleared, but the roofs of the houses wore white caps. The trees in the square were silvery, as if coated in frost. The air smelled of cold and, somewhere, of wood smoke from a chimney. She walked to the Transit Diner. A 10-minute walk along the familiar street, past the church with its steeple, past the market which was open until 4 on Saturdays. The diner's yellow window glowed just as it had on that November night. The crooked sign, the simple door. Claire paused for a second at the entrance, not because she was hesitating, but just to give herself a moment. Then she opened the door and went in. It was warm inside. It smelled of real, strong coffee and something baked. A few tables were occupied, a family with children by the window, two elderly men with a chessboard in the corner. A cozy, lively hum. Not urban but small town, not loud. Leo was standing behind the counter. He looked at her the moment she walked in, as if he had been waiting for that exact sound of the door opening. No feigned surprise, no broad public smile. He just saw her, and something in his face grew a little warmer. "Claire," he said. "Leo?" she replied. She took off her jacket, hung it on a hook by the entrance, and sat at the same table by the window. Her table, it felt like. Outside the window was the snow-covered street, where a woman was walking with a child, holding their hand. Leo brought her coffee without asking. He placed the small cup and saucer with a sugar packet in front of her. "You remember what I drink?" Claire said. "I remember," he confirmed. He was quiet for a second. "How are you?" She wrapped her hands around the cup. The coffee was hot. Her fingers warmed up immediately. "Better," she answered. And it was the truth, the whole truth, without reservations. "Much better," he nodded, not probing for more that same quality she had appreciated the first time. Taking what was said at face value, not pulling at loose threads. "Are you here for long?" he asked. "For a few days," Claire said, and added, after a slight pause, "I don't know yet. Maybe longer." Leo looked at her attentively, unhurriedly. "The cozy nook is open," he said. "Just in case." "I know," she smiled. "Already booked a room." He smiled back slightly, that same quiet smile she remembered. Then he went to another table. New customers had arrived. Claire watched him go and thought that there are people around whom you don't need to explain anything, pretend anything, or keep anything in mind. You just have to be. She had long forgotten what that felt like. They talked for a long time that evening, a really long time, without rushing. Claire told him not everything at once, but gradually, the way you tell stories that haven't quite become the past, but are no longer the present. About the train, about that night, about what she had to do over the last month. Leo listened silently, not interrupting, not rushing her, only occasionally asking short, precise questions that helped her continue. When she finished, he looked at her for a few seconds. "You handled it yourself," he said. "Almost," Claire replied. "Brenda helped, the lawyer helped, my dad, in his own way." She paused. "You helped." "Back in November, I just found you a hostel," Leo said. "Sometimes that's enough." The diner closed at 10. Leo was clearing tables. Claire sat with her last cup of coffee, looking out the dark window at the quietly falling snow. It was sparse, with big flakes, like in children's winter books. When she got up to leave, Leo came out from behind the counter. "Tomorrow's Sunday," he said. "I open at 9. If you want breakfast that isn't from the hostel." "I do," Claire said. It was cold and quiet outside. The snow continued to fall. Claire walked along the cleared sidewalk, and the snowflakes settled on her jacket. In her hair, she wasn't in a hurry. She thought about the 7 months of a marriage that had been a lie. A month that had demanded everything of her. Composure, a cool head, precise decisions, the court, the final conversation on the steps, Mark walking away, and ahead, a morning in a small town, coffee in a slightly crooked diner. A person who remembers how she takes her coffee and doesn't ask unnecessary questions. Sometimes, that is the most important thing of all. The Cozy Nook hostel greeted her just as it had in November, with simplicity, warmth, and a lack of extra words. The same woman at the reception desk gave her a key. Claire went up to the room, put her bag down, took off her jacket, and lay down on the bed, stretching out long and with pleasure, the way you stretch after a long journey. Outside, the snow was falling. The small town was falling asleep. Claire closed her eyes. She didn't know what would happen next, in a week, in a month, in a year. She didn't know if she would stay here or return to New York. She didn't know how the thing that was just beginning between her and Leo would end slow, quiet, without schemes or calculations. But she knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of this not knowing. She wasn't trying to calculate, wasn't trying to build a plan. She just lay in the darkness of a small room in a small town and listened to the silence. Pure, real, her own. Tomorrow would be morning, and it would be a good one.